Wednesday night, the night before Thanksgiving, they're in Chicago, Illinois. Where do you gotta start? Where do you gotta start, Brian?
I'm not gonna sing it.
Like Mussolini and extra cheese, pickles, onions, if you please. Put it on the bun, the mayo there. I'll eat it in my underwear.
Oh, come on, enough.
I'm the cult of meat with extra cheese. The cult of meat with extra cheese. The cult of meat with extra cheese. Now with tomato.
Oh, I didn't expect that.
There comes Punk. And I'm thinking, okay, they're leading with Punk and QT Marshall. Punk's a safe shot in Chicago every time. But suddenly, the music of MJF, not QT Marshall. And I'm saying, well, it's Christmas come early. And by the time he gets to the ring, he doesn't even, the people are ready to hear this. They've wanted to hear this just like everybody else has, because Punk's noted for his promos, MJF's noted for his promos, and also they're two of the most interesting personalities in the company. And MJF, before he barely even had to speak, they had the asshole chance, the CM Punk chance, the shut the fuck up chance. And then they started. And the way they did this, if you notice when they started out, they were all the way across the ring from each other in opposite corners, and Punk is just humoring this little prick, like, what the fuck is this guy come out here to say? And let him say it. And I don't want to jump ahead, but over the course of the thing, as the comments got more heated and there got to be more back and forth, that's when they got up closer together to each other. So they didn't start up. They knew they were going a while. So they didn't start face to face, because then where are you going to go? Remember, I mentioned that before, especially with MJF and the way he's so sharp with some of this stuff. Before he gets to his go home line, he's already emasculated the babyface if he's right there up in front of him where he could reach him. This time they started and they gradually came together. But Punk let MJF build it, and he just sat back and had the facials and the reactions to it. But MJF brought the only straight edge guy I've ever seen looks like a meth addict. And I'm going to verbally finish you quicker than your UFC career.
That was the one. That was the one where as soon as you heard that, it took it to another level, because you didn't know if they were ever going to bring that up in AEW. You figured it would be a sore spot. And who's going to bring it up? The one guy who wants to really annoy CM Punk. It was great.
And then just for Punk going to get a microphone and somebody handing him a microphone, the people popped on that because they were, okay, here we go. MJF, my jealous fan, the poster of me on your wall, but then he hit him with a less famous Miz. Oh my, what a burn, as the kids say.
And great reactions.
Yes.
From both guys throughout the whole thing. Very different reactions, but the camera was on their faces and you got to see the reactions and it was perfect.
And it was like, obviously, both these guys, it wasn't obvious that you couldn't see a mile away that somebody had written this down, or even that they had written it down and practiced it. It seemed off the cuff, spontaneous, two guys trying to blister each other as best they could and keep up their respective reputations with that. MJF, your breath smells like shit because you've been kissing so much ass. It's PG Punk. And then he starts comparing him to John Cena. But I did think that it was, ironic, funny, preposterous, whatever, that in front of this crowd, being compared to the biggest star that the wrestling business has made in the last 15 years is bad.
It's the representation.
But it's what he
represents.
It's just where everybody was in the scheme of things. But anyway, as they wound up and got worked up and got closer to each other, and MJF says, you're nothing more than second best. That's all you've ever been. And, I'm better than you, and you know it. And then Punk comes back, instead of being mad and yelling at him and pissed off, he said, you're right. You're right. At first, I didn't know if they'd still give a shit. I didn't know if I still had it. I might have been, but I'm not scared anymore, and I'm not unsure anymore, whatever, and I'm not scared of you. And I'll let you make the New York Times again, this time in the obituaries. And then he told him off and escalated it again. Replaced as one of the 4 pillars by Britt Baker. And then the only way that you'll ever be number one is if Tony has a daughter and you marry her. And I even saw somebody complaining that they spent too much time talking about the other company.
I saw a lot of that, and I think in a lot of cases in wrestling, it's a real thing, like an Impact. Don't talk about WWE. It makes you look small, but that wasn't what this was.
No.
These guys didn't ignore the obvious, the things that everyone in that audience knew about. And by bringing all that stuff up, it made it all seem more real.
Yeah.
You believed what they were saying. These are things you may not necessarily think you would ever hear on a wrestling show, which is why you got some of those reactions. I think anyone who had a problem with them talking about, I mean, they didn't just go out there and yell WWF, WWE, excuse me. But they referenced things that everyone knows about. It made perfect sense.
Yes. And they reference a place that he's been, and they referenced a fucking... all those fans know what's going on, and they know the relationships, and they know the track records, and it was good stuff. And like you said, it made it seem real. And then after if you marry Tony's daughter, that's, well, here now, the laundry starts coming off, and Punk offered to punch MJF in his needle dick. And so they start doing here comes the scarf, and here comes the jacket, and here comes the blah, blah, blah. And then MJF rolls out and takes off like a heel. Fuck. We ain't going to get to see it now, but we want to see it. It's pro wrestling without any physicality whatsoever. The first step of pro wrestling is get people interested in the personalities. The second step in pro wrestling is get the personalities in conflict with each other, where the people want to see them fight before they actually fight. And then the third step in pro wrestling is let them have the fight and sell tickets to it. Or pay-per-views or draw ratings or whatever the scale is these days. And that's what they're fucking doing. And I was gobsmacked that, again, you don't see anything that real or legitimate or just well done on anything the WWE does, because even if they had anybody that could talk like this, they don't let them. And those fucking pea-brained little fucking minutia-dick fucking comedy writers hand them shit and say, no, you'll say this word for word, and it sounds like it. So this is where AEW can easily blow the WWE television programs out of the water, is with real interesting promos, because it's the only place that guys are allowed to do them. And honestly, how many places have guys that can talk like MJF and Punk? So there you have that.
I can't rave enough about this segment. I watched it more than once. I tweeted it out. I never tweet out AEW. I tweeted this out because you know what?
Because you're on the payroll.
Because I'm on the payroll. Tony, I need a raise. But, I tweeted it out because it represents what I want out of wrestling in 2021. We can't go backwards. I don't ever want to go backwards. Everyone's like, go back to 1985. I don't want to go to 1985. I want to live now. But there are things you can apply that worked in 1985 that you shouldn't just reject because they're from 1985. What I like about this is it's diametrically opposed to a Young Bucks segment, where I think even if you like them, you have to admit there's goofiness, there's silliness, beyond a natural goofiness and silliness. There are wrestlers. Jim Duggan was naturally goofy on promos in Mid-South. I'm not talking about WWF Jim Duggan. But the Young Bucks stuff, and I'm using them to encapsulate a lot of the bad shit, the Orange Cassidy stuff, the Matt Hardy stuff, a lot of this crap that I think doesn't belong on a national broadcast in 2021, it makes me embarrassed to be a wrestling fan, and it makes me not like what I'm watching. But when I see stuff like this, when I see stuff like Danielson right now, stuff that treats it like it's real, stuff that doesn't insult your intelligence, stuff that's logical, that makes sense, that doesn't seem ridiculous, this is my argument for what wrestling should be right now. This stuff right here, that's captivating, that goes 20 minutes, and you can't fucking turn away from it. I couldn't leave the room. I was getting called downstairs. Said, I'll be down in a few minutes. I usually pause the shit and go downstairs.
Well, and part of that was because Suzanne forgot to leave you the keys to the handcuffs.
Well, maybe so. But this was a phenomenal segment. I didn't want it to end. It went a couple of different directions that I didn't expect. And this is 2 weeks in a row now where I can't wait to see what's going to happen next with these two. Nothing physical. Right now, it's just mocking each other and getting under each other's skin. Draw this out. We said last time, don't rush it. You got something special here. You got the biggest star in that company. I would argue the biggest star in the entire wrestling business right now versus the next biggest star in AEW, quite frankly. This is a special moment and a special feud. And so far, 2 weeks in, it's been great. And to me, it perfectly shows what I think wrestling in 2021, in terms of the angles and interviews and segments outside of the matches, this is what I think it should be. Everything can't be this, but everything can have the tone of this.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned it's real, so it would work in any time period. In the 80s, they would have been yelling at each other about, well, I beat so-and-so, and I beat so-and-so, and I beat, well, you cheated to beat me. And they would have been talking about the finish of something or their record like that was completely legitimate. The people would have been with it because they thought it was. Now, they were still making comments that the people could believe were legitimate. They're just personal. They're not coming out and saying the wrestling business is 100% real. And they're not coming out and saying that the wrestling business is 100% work or anything in between. They are making it personal. And each one of them is, well, not each one of them, Punk isn't jealous of MJF, but MJF, the heel, is jealous of Punk and trying to get over him. So it's instead of, in the storyline context, instead of fighting over a championship or being screwed in a finish or whatever and treating the business that way, they treat the business still seriously as a competition amongst who's going to be the biggest star and who can get over, and they don't mention anything that would buzzkill you and take you out of the moment and remind you that wrestling is a work. So it's just a little different way of approaching two guys having a problem with each other. And they're doing it in a worked environment where you can still believe there's some animosity. And because one thing that fans know is that there actually is legitimate animosity in a lot of cases amongst guys who want to occupy the same spot, whether the endeavor that they're participating in is work or not. So, yeah, this could be modern wrestling.
We've heard from so many people, from interviews, from different things, from wrestlers who work there, that Tony loves Mid-South Wrestling. Early on, remember we heard that this is going to be like a modern version of Mid-South Wrestling.
Yes, which was why I was so particularly offended after hearing that when I saw the legless boy and whatever.
This and Danielson the last few weeks, this is Mid-South Wrestling in 2021.
Yes. Yep.
So I think it's important to note that, because there's still a lot of other really bad shit. There's a lot of other shit that's improving. There's a lot of other people who may right now be doing something to hold them over until the next thing, but there's still bad shit. But the good shit in AEW right now is the best shit in years. And this Punk MJF feud, this is very promising. I mean, 2 weeks in, everyone's been buzzing about this segment. A 20-minute talking segment. People are sick of talking segments. It didn't feel like the normal talking segment.
No, as a matter of fact, and we're not over with Punk's business yet, but when I speed searched through the commercial, which that's really the only time I used the speed search this week, when I went through the commercial and came back, that's when I realized, my God, we're almost half an hour into this show and it's flown by. And then they had the Punk. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and this goes into the next thing, but what I was going to say is it's really an interesting dynamic right now because AEW, Tony Khan's from Illinois, and they go to Chicago a lot. And it creates a really cool dynamic you don't get any more in wrestling because everything's a national touring company. You get a home field advantage for Punk. You got a local audience cheering a local guy multiple times a year on national TV. We haven't had that in a while. You know, I mean, I know it sounds like a silly thing, but we never get that. We never get a hometown flavor on a national wrestling show, and we're getting it all the time now with Punk in Chicago. It's kind of cool.
And if the WWE guys do happen to visit their hometown, if anybody knows that they're from that town, they generally get bent over and pissed on and have mud slung in their face.
Kiss my egg. Egg.
Gobbledygook.